The ecosystems are part of nature where living organisms interact among themselves and with their physical environment. An ecosystem is composed of a biotic community integrated with its physical environment through the exchange of energy and recycling of the nutrients. The biological hierarchical scale is a complex biological structures and systems. Each level in the hierarchy represents an increase in organizational complexity. The following organizations are the following. First, gene. The gene is the basic physical and functional unit of heredity. Genes are made up of DNA. Second, cells. The smallest structural and functional unit of an organism is commonly known as the basic unit of life. They provide structure for the organisms that take in nutrients from food, convert those nutrients into energy, and carry out specialized functions. Third, tissue. It is a group of cells that have similar structure and act to perform a specific task. Fourth, organ. An organ is a group of tissues in a living organisms that have been adapted to perform a specific function. Fifth, organisms. This refers to a living thing that has an organized structure, can react and stimuli, reproduce, grow, adapt, and maintain homeostasis. 6. Population. A population is the number of organisms of the same species that live in a particular area at the same time. 7. Species. This refers to a group of organisms that can reproduce with one another in nature and produce fertile offspring. 8. Community. This represents the population of all species living and interacting in an area at a particular time. 9. Ecosystem. This refers to a community of living organisms in conjunction with the non-living components of their environment, interacting as a system. 10. Landscape. This refers to the assemblages of a different ecosystem. A landscape structure can be quantified by describing characteristics of patches such as number, size, shape, position, and decomposition. 11. Biosphere. The biosphere is made up of the parts of the earth where life exists. The next topic is all about the ecosystem. Just like what I have said earlier, ecosystem is a community of living organisms in conjunction with the non-living components of their environment, interacting as a system. These living and non-living components are linked together through nutrient cycles and energy flows. The characteristic of ecosystem. The ecosystem is a functional unit of ecology because it is the smallest and basic unit of nature, which is independent and self-sustaining due to various interactions between the non-living and living components and the different organisms among themselves. The structure of an ecosystem is related to its species diversity, in the sense that complex ecosystem has high species diversity, because the pristine ecosystem has a more species thriving in it. Once an ecosystem is altered or destroyed by humans, the species diversity will also decrease because of some organisms cannot adapt to the changes in their habitat. The function of ecosystem is related to energy flow and material cycles within and outside the system. In the flow of energy and inorganic nutrients through the ecosystem, to generalize the flow, the ultimate source of energy for most ecosystems is the sun, and the ultimate fate of energy in ecosystem is for it to be lost as a heat. The energy and nutrients are passed from organisms to organisms through the food chain, as one organism eats another. And then the last organism was the decomposer. It removes the last energy from the remains of organisms, and then the inorganic nutrients are cycled and the energy is not. The relative amount of energy needed to maintain an ecosystem depends on its structure. So, the complex ecosystem needed less energy to maintain themselves because of the high species diversity that regulates the flow of energy. Young ecosystems develop and change from less complex to more complex ecosystem through the process called succession. We have two types of succession, namely primary succession and secondary succession. The primary succession is the evolution of a biological community's ecological structure. in which plants and animals first colonize a barren, lifeless habitat. Species that arrive first in newly created environment are called pioneer species, and through their interactions, they build up a simple initial biological community. This community becomes more complex as new species arrive. While the secondary succession is the evolution of biological community in which plants and animals recolonize a habitat after major disturbance, such as devastating floods, landslides, and human activity like the illegal logging. Take note, once the ecosystem is destroyed, it can never bring back the original condition because the damage is already there. Whatever rehabilitation we made, it is completely different from the first succession. Another characteristic of ecosystem is each ecosystem has its own energy budget, which cannot be exceeded. An energy budget describes the ways in which energy is transformed from one state to another within the system. This focuses on the use and transformations of energy in the biosphere or its components. Adaptation to local environmental conditions is the important feature of the biotic components of an ecosystem, failing which they might perish. This is because the living organisms are adapted to their environment. This means that the way they look, the way they behave, how they are built, or their way of life makes them suited to survive and reproduce in their habitats. But due to the abrupt changes in the environment, some of the organisms can no longer survive in this condition, and this will lead them to extinction. The function of every ecosystem involves a series of cycles. These cycles are driven by energy and the continuation or existence of ecosystem demands, exchange of materials, nutrients, to and from the different components. Just like what I have said earlier, the energy flows directionally through Earth's ecosystem, typically entering in the form of sunlight and exiting in the form of heat. The components of ecosystem. Biotic and abiotic are the two essential factors responsible for shaping the ecosystem. The biotic factors refer to all the living beings present in an ecosystem, and the abiotic factors refer to all the non-living components like physical condition and chemical agents in an ecosystem. Therefore, both the abiotic and biotic resources affect survival and reproduction process. Furthermore, both these components are reliant on each other. Suppose if one of the factors is removed or altered, its repercussions will be faced by the entire ecosystem. Without a doubt, abiotic factors directly affect the survival of organisms. The processes of ecosystem. This figure with the plants, zebra, lion, and some other organisms illustrate the two main ideas about how ecosystems function. Ecosystems have energy flows and ecosystems cycle materials. These two processes are linked, but they are not quite the same. Energy enters the biological system as light energy is transferred into chemical energy in organic molecules by cellular processes including the photosynthesis and respiration, and ultimately is converted to heat energy. This energy is dissipated, meaning it is lost to the system as heat. Once it is lost, it cannot be recycled. Without the continued input of solar energy, biological systems would quickly shut down. Elements such as carbon, nitrogen, or phosphorus enter living organisms in a variety of ways. Plants obtain elements from the surrounding atmosphere, water, or soils. Animals may also obtain elements directly from the physical environment, but usually they obtain this mainly as a consequence of consuming other organisms. These materials are transformed biochemically within the bodies of organisms, but sooner or later, due to excretion or decomposition, they are returned to an inorganic state. The bacteria complete this process through the process called decomposition or mineralization. The transformations of energy in an ecosystem begin first with the input of energy from the sun. Energy from the sun is captured by the process of photosynthesis. The carbon dioxide is combined with hydrogen that was derived from the splitting of water molecules to produce carbohydrates. The figure portrays a simple food chain in which energy from the sun captured by plant photosynthesis flows from trophic level to trophic level by the food chain. A trophic level is composed of organisms that make a living in the same way. That is, they are all primary producers, primary consumers, or secondary and tertiary consumers, and the quaternary consumers. Dead tissue and waste products are produced at all levels. Scavengers, detrivores, and decomposers collectively account for the use of all such waste. The amount of primary production varies a great deal from place to place, due to the differences in the amount of solar radiation and the availability of nutrients and water. Energy transfer through the food chain is inefficient. This means that less energy is available at the herbivore level than at the primary producer level, less yet at the carnivore level, and so on. This is the ecological pyramid. The diagram shows the relative amount of energy or organisms contained within each trophic level of a food chain or food web. Take note the rule of 10. The rule of 10 or the 10% rule means that when energy is passed in an ecosystem from one trophic level to the next, only 10% of the energy will be passed on. All the organisms in the trophic level use the available energy for life processes such as photosynthesis, growth, cellular respiration, and metabolism, and these organisms release some energy as a heat. Remember that every chemical process that happens in your body releases heat as a byproduct. The difference between the food chain and the food web. Just like what I have said earlier, the food chain is the sequence of transfer of matter and energy in the form of food from organism to organism. Food chains intertwine locally into a food web because most organisms consume more than one type of animal or plant. Plants, which convert solar energy to food by photosynthesis, are the primary food source. In a predator chain, a plant-eating animal is eaten by a flesh-eating animal. In a parasite chain, a smaller organism consumes part of a larger host and may itself be parasitized by even smaller organisms. While a food web consists of all the food chains in a single ecosystem, each living thing in an ecosystem is a part of multiple food chains. Each food chain is one possible path that energy and nutrients may take as they move through the ecosystem. All of the interconnected and overlapping food chains in an ecosystem make up a food web.